My husband had an affair with his personal secretary and demanded a divorce while our son was still struggling with cancer. I decided to sign the divorce papers, but before leaving, I made him pay the price. Late at night, in the cold hospital room, I sat beside my son's bed, feeling as though the entire world was gradually fading away from my view. The sound of the phone ringing suddenly broke the silence of the room, a ring that no one wanted to hear, especially when the night was so still that I could clearly hear my own breathing. The dim light cast a faint glow on Ben's tired face, my 14-year-old son. Ben was asleep, his frail body weakened from the continuous rounds of chemotherapy, his hair nearly gone, but his face still held the innocence of a child. My hand gently rested on his forehead, as if wanting to send him some warmth in the coldness of the hospital. The phone on the table vibrated, and in that moment, the world around me seemed to stop. The sound of the phone vibrating in the stillness felt cold, like an alarm. I glanced at it, the faint smile on my lips still in place, thinking it might be the doctor calling with good news about Ben's health. But when I looked at the phone screen, my heart seemed to stop beating. The name Danny, my husband, appeared. A familiar name, but now it had become an obsession, a sign of a change I didn't want to face. Inside me, fear swept over me, spreading throughout my body. I felt helpless like never before, a chilling sensation, as if something terrible was waiting ahead. But I couldn't imagine that this moment would be the one marking the collapse of my life. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling. I raised it to my ear and heard Danny's voice, but it was not the familiar voice I once loved. His voice was dry, cold, emotionless, as if everything had ended long ago and I hadn't known it. "Mary, I want us to divorce," Danny said, slowly but clearly. "I have someone else." Those words hit my heart like a punch. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. I replayed each word over and over, unable to understand why he would say that, why he would decide to end everything while I was struggling with pain and hoping for my son. His words were like a lightning bolt that tore through the air, cutting through everything. I went silent, as if time had stopped. All the sounds in the room seemed to be swallowed. It was just me and one big question without an answer. Why? Why now? Why would he say those things when I was worrying about Ben? Why me, the one who had dedicated my whole life to him, doing everything I could to keep this family together? I looked down at my son, still asleep in his delirium, unaware that our lives would change forever. I bit my lip, trying not to let the tears fall, but I couldn't hold them back. The pain, the sorrow, welled up in my heart, and I realized that not just once, but my entire life had been torn apart by my husband. I wasn't just betrayed. I was left behind in the weakest moment of my life. I, 45 years old, was a strong woman who had stepped through many challenges in life, always carrying a boundless love for my family. I wasn't a woman lost in the glamour of society or personal pleasures. I was always the one standing behind, taking care of the people I loved. I had devoted 20 years of my life to Danny, the husband I loved and admired, a strong, decisive man who had once been a solid support for our family. During all those years, I wasn't just a wife, but also a companion, a wonderful mother to our only son, Ben. Ben, my 14-year-old boy, full of energy and always full of hope for life, though still a teenager, had to face the biggest challenge of his life, stomach cancer. I saw in Ben's eyes the same strong light, the same resilience that was in me. Even though my son was fighting daily with pain, I never stopped believing in miracles. I spent all my time taking care of Ben, worrying about his meals, his treatments, and hoping for the day when my son could return to a normal life full of dreams and ambitions. After 20 years of commitment, when I sat down and looked back, I realized that I had lost myself in the journey of taking care of my family. The dreams that once burned in my heart were now just dust, forgotten in the dark corners of memory. The dreams of distant travels, of evenings when I could freely do what I liked, were now only found in dusty pages of books. Personal hobbies that only I knew now seemed like distant dreams. I once thought that I would forever be the devoted wife, the perfect mother, doing everything for the family, and that love would be the thread connecting everything. But that sacrifice gradually pulled me into a vicious cycle, making me lose myself in this life. The sleepless nights taking care of Ben, the moments I gave everything to meet the needs of the family, pulled me away from my personal desires, dimming all the remaining parts of my heart. I thought everything would always be stable, that my love and sacrifice would always be the solid foundation for a happy family. But no, everything started to change silently, but unmistakably. The evenings spent together telling stories, the laughter at family meals gradually turned into endless arguments, baseless criticisms. The sweet moments of the past were now nothing but cold words and emotional distance that I couldn't explain. Danny, the husband I had devoted my life to, now seemed like a stranger, no longer caring about my feelings, no longer noticing the sacrifices I had made. Everything in my life started to feel empty. Every morning when I woke up, I only saw a deep hole of exhaustion and disappointment. I sensed the change, but I seemed unable to stop it. I began to feel like a shadow in the house I had built, once the woman who was the center of all trust, but now just a faint and forgotten image. Then, one day, the final shock came. While I was drowning in worries for Ben, fighting every day to keep the family strong, Danny found comfort in the arms of another woman, the secretary. A painful, powerful punch that shattered everything I had trusted. I never imagined that in the nights I stayed awake beside my son, in the hours I immersed myself in responsibilities and worries for the family, Danny quietly entered into another affair, a relationship he kept secret until the very end. The feeling of betrayal not only hurt me, but also made me feel like a ghost in my own home. I had given my heart and soul to Danny, trusted in the love and bond we had built over the years. But now, all that was left were bitterness and emptiness. I realized that the love I had given was now something faint, deceived, while he, in the darkness of our arguments and sleepless nights, had been gradually drawn into the arms of another woman. In the days that followed, my house seemed to be immersed in a thick fog, thick enough that I couldn't see the way out. Every step I took felt heavy, like a battle with myself. Every breath, every time I inhaled, felt like a challenge I couldn't overcome. I not only had to face the pain of Danny's betrayal, but also carry the immense responsibility for my son, Ben. The 14-year-old boy, the son I had nurtured and protected as my very life, was now battling the cruel stomach cancer. One morning, when the alarm rang, I woke up with blurry eyes from lack of sleep, exhausted from sleepless nights taking care of Ben. I turned to look at Ben, who was lost in his sleep, his frail body, pale skin from the painful chemotherapy. Every time I looked at him, my heart tightened. I couldn't imagine the scene if Ben couldn't overcome this illness. But not only that, I also carried another pain in my heart, the betrayal from my husband, the man I had loved, sacrificed my whole life to care for, the one who had once been a wonderful husband I trusted. Now, all that was left were the cold words and the divorce request he had uttered. The whole day, I couldn't forget those words. I tried to focus on Ben, trying my best to care for him, but everything around me seemed to fade away, leaving only a frightening silence. At night, when Ben fell asleep, I was alone, sitting in the dark, thinking about what had happened. Every thought of Danny felt like a sharp knife cutting into my mind. How could I accept this? How could I live with the betrayal of a husband who, after 20 years of building a family, suddenly demanded a divorce? One evening, in the silent living room, the dim light cast a shadow on my haggard face. I sat there like a ghost, staring out of the window. The outside world was as dark as ink, but everything inside me was darker still. The world seemed to be spinning around me, but I couldn't find a way out. That was when the phone on the table suddenly vibrated, breaking the heavy silence. A cold ring, like an alarm, signaling a change I couldn't even imagine. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling. It was an unfamiliar number. My heart raced, and when I pressed the button to answer, the cold voice from the other end made me shudder. Mary, Danny's secretary's voice, hit me like a punch to the face. I'm Danny's secretary. I need to talk to you. I stood silent for a moment, trying to remain calm, but I felt like my whole body was shaking with fear. A cold wave surged from the soles of my feet to the top of my head. What's going on? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, choked with emotion. You need to know something important, the secretary continued without any emotion. If Danny doesn't have proof of the affair, he will lose all of his inheritance according to his father's will. I heard it and couldn't believe what I had just heard. I dropped the phone, a wave of dizziness hit me, forcing me to lean on the armrest of the chair. No, no way, I muttered. What is he doing? You need to know this, Mary. The secretary continued, still as cold as ever. I don't want to drag you into this, but you need to know. I stood frozen, my hands shaking as I held the phone, my heart pounding so fast it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I couldn't say a word. I felt as if I was frozen, the ground beneath me crumbling little by little. Everything suddenly became too big to face. What the secretary said was not a simple warning, but a ticking time bomb ready to destroy everything I had once trusted and hoped for. I sat down on the chair, my mind spinning. It felt like everything was collapsing around me. But at that moment, I took a deep breath. I looked at the family picture hanging on the wall. A brief moment, seemingly eternal, of happier days. A sharp pain spread through my heart when I thought about what I could lose and what I had sacrificed. I couldn't let everything fall apart so easily. It was time. There was no turning back. I had to protect Ben. I had to protect my rights. And most of all, I had to make Danny face the consequences of his actions. I was no longer the woman who would accept everything. I wouldn't allow my family to be torn apart without a fight. Love had made me strong, but this betrayal would help me discover a hidden strength I had never imagined. No matter how dark tonight may be, I will rise. I am ready to fight. That night, the atmosphere at Danny's engagement party with his secretary seemed heavy, as if every breath was filled with an unexplainable tension. Everyone was laughing and talking joyfully, but for me, it was a reunion I could never forget. I had decided that tonight would be the moment when everything had to end. I could no longer continue living in the shadow of this betrayal. I had been quietly preparing for a long time. Everything had been meticulously planned, every smallest detail accounted for. And now, as I stepped into the lavish room filled with artificial laughter and glaring lights, everything around me seemed to blur. I looked at Danny, standing next to the woman he had secretly given his heart to, and the pain rose up again in my chest. But not tonight. Tonight, I would not let things continue like this. I walked toward Danny, my gaze as cold as ice. No one at the party knew what was coming. No one understood the change in the way I saw this life. I quietly opened my handbag, my hand steady as I pulled out a white envelope, the handwriting on the envelope belonging to someone no longer in my life, George, Danny's father. I looked straight into Danny's eyes, a sharp gaze that made him flinch. "This is your father's will," I said, my voice not angry but cold, challenging. I pulled a piece of paper from the envelope, and my next words were like arrows aimed directly at Danny's heart. "If you divorce without proof of adultery, you will not receive any inheritance from your family." The whole room suddenly fell silent. The laughter, the talking, everything stopped at that moment. All eyes turned to me, the woman who no longer feared. I looked at Danny, seeing his eyes waver, his face turning pale as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Danny stood frozen, speechless. Everything he had tried to control, everything he thought was in his grasp, now suddenly fell into my hands. He never expected that the wife he thought he could overlook would react like this. He was no longer the one in charge of his own story. You can't do this," Danny said, his voice trembling, but the panic was undeniable. I looked at him, not a trace of pity in my eyes. "You thought I would sit back and let you destroy our lives without paying the price? You betrayed me, but I won't let you destroy everything." I held the will in my hand, my eyes as cold as a storm about to strike. The price you'll pay is not just a divorce, Danny. You will lose everything. Not just me, not just this family, but everything you think you deserve. The party became completely still, no one daring to move. Danny seemed rooted to the spot. The people around looked at each other, unsure of what to do. But that didn't matter to me anymore. I had done what I needed to do. This isn't just about divorce, I continued, my voice unwavering. This is a fight for justice. Justice for me and for our son. And you won't escape the consequences of your actions. Everything seemed to stand still in that tense atmosphere. Cold beads of sweat rolled down Danny's forehead as he realized that, in this battle, he no longer held control. I held all the power, and no excuse could change that. The room remained immersed in silence. The words I spoke were not just a warning. They were a sentence already declared, an end to everything he thought he could easily escape from. I stood one last time and looked at the green cottage house, the home that Danny and I had built together for 20 years. Every corner of this house held memories, moments I once thought would last forever. But now, those memories were nothing but wounds, cracks that could never heal. And this time, as I made the decision to walk away, it wasn't because of Danny's betrayal, but because I had found the strength to live for myself. Mary, you can't do this, Danny said, his voice suddenly softening, as if trying to pull things back. I know I was wrong, but we can fix everything. You can't leave. I stood still, not rushing to look at him. I knew that for a long time, all of his words were just comfort, excuses for his betrayal. I no longer felt like his wife. I was a woman reclaiming my power, not to salvage a marriage that had died, but to live my own life. No, Danny, I responded, my voice firm and full of determination. I don't need you to feel happy. I don't need you to feel complete. I've lived for you too long, sacrificed for this family too long. Now it's time for me to live for myself. I didn't turn back to look at him, but continued walking towards the door. I gripped the doorknob tightly as if to close off everything that had come before. When the door opened, a light breeze brushed through as if welcoming me, pulling me out of the darkness I had lived in for so many years. Are you really going to leave? Danny yelled from behind, his voice filled with disappointment and anger. Then you'll regret it. You have nothing but me. I paused for a moment, my eyes reflecting strong resolve. I didn't look back, but I felt a change within myself. I was no longer the woman who would endure. I was a free woman, and now I could rebuild my life without his presence. I won't regret it, Danny, I replied, my voice calm but certain. I've lost too much to realize that happiness isn't something you measure by a man. I don't need you, and I will never need you again. And then I stepped out of the house I once thought was my home, a sense of freedom enveloping me. I was no longer afraid, no longer worried about what had passed. I decided to start over, letting the pain, the disappointments, and the wounds be a part of the past. I returned to the work I had neglected, taking care of Ben, and rebuilding my life from the broken pieces. I knew life would never be easy, but one thing was certain. I would never give up on myself. I had found inner strength within myself, and that was something no one could take away. With a new light, I stepped outside, no fear in my heart. I was no longer the betrayed wife. I was a strong, free woman, and I was ready to begin a new journey. A journey of freedom, happiness, and self-respect. Do you think I did the right thing by facing this betrayal? Did I act too decisively? If you like stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel to keep up with more epic plot twists.